Voyage to go, history. Life is a journey, being part of it is everything. Hello, my name is Jessica. Welcome to episode 20 of my historical travel podcast Voyage to go, history, where I take you on the most adventurous journeys from the past that continue to shape our view of the world today. In this first historical journey that I want to tell you about, we accompany young Georg Forster on his voyage around the world with Captain Cook in the second half of the 18th century. Georg Forster was born in 1754 near Gdansk and emigrated to London with his father in 1766 when he was 11 years old. In 1772, the British Admiralty made a spontaneous offer to Georg's father, the scientist Reinhold Forster, to join the upcoming second voyage of James Cook to the South Seas, to compile a scientific report about the journey and to publish it upon their return. The father agreed on the condition that his 17-year-old son Georg would accompany them as a draftsman and scientific assistant. After more than 3 years, they returned from this journey. At the age of 23, Georg published the English version of a travel narrative in London under the captivating title A Voyage Round the World. The travel report became one of the most fascinating books of its time. Not only did it mark the beginning of modern travel literature, but it also stood out in both content and style from other accounts of Cook's groundbreaking explorations, offering a captivating diversity of the unusual. His book had a strong influence on many later ethnologists. Forster's narratives and reflections are always focused on the foundations of humanity, with a particular emphasis on the fascinating social behavior of individuals and groups of people. Let us dive into the depth of this literary adventure, sailing not only around the world but also exploring the essence of humanity. Georg's travel narrative is written in the language of the 18th century. To make it more understandable, I have largely translated it into modern English. Forster's knowledge is that of the second half of the 18th century, so in the Voyage to Go History podcast, I will occasionally provide additional information and assistance. What happened in the last episode?
After weeks of cold, shifting winds, and restless seas, the crew of the Resolution finally felt the air grow warmer as they sailed northward through the South Pacific. The biting chill of the southern latitudes gave way to soft trade winds. The albatrosses and storm petrels disappeared, and the thermometer climbed above 16 degrees. For the first time since leaving New Zealand, the men shed their winter clothes and began to feel human again. Spirits lifted. Laughter returned to the deck, where sailors passed the time with games and stories. Signs of the tropics emerged. Tropic birds, flying fish, and the dazzling gold of sunset skies. With these omens of milder waters, the long southern leg of the voyage came to an end. By late July, the Resolution had drawn close enough to the adventure for news to pass between the ships. It was sobering. 1 man dead, 20 sick with scurvy. The contrast to Cook's own crew, nearly all still healthy, was stark. Better diet, fresh air, and discipline had made the difference. Still, illness had left its mark: swollen legs, dark bruises, and fatigue. Cook sent a sailor to replace the lost cook on the adventure, and some officers visited their sister ship, noting the toll taken by confinement and poor provisions. Now, with the trade wind finally steady and the tropical warmth returning, both ships headed northeast. Their goal, to resume exploration, rested, regrouped, and with new resolve.
Wednesday, August 11th, 1773, South Pacific.
In the morning, they spotted a low island about 11 kilometers, 6 nautical miles, to the south. It was roughly 7.4 kilometers, 4 nautical miles, long and appeared as flat as the sea itself. Here and there, small clusters of trees seemed to rise directly from the ocean, with the tall crowns of coconut palms towering above the rest. After such a tiresome and monotonous journey, the mere sight of land brought them great joy, even though they expected nothing from it. And although the island had nothing particularly remarkable about it, its naturally simple appearance was pleasing to the eye. The thermometer consistently showed temperatures between 21 and 27 degrees Celsius, 70 to 80 Fahrenheit, yet the heat never felt excessive. Under clear skies, a steady and pleasantly cooling trade wind blew, and the awnings stretched over the aft deck provided welcome shade. The island was named Resolution Island. Judging by his journal, it was probably the same land previously cited by Monsieur de Bougainville. It lay at 17 degrees, 24 minutes south latitude and 141 degrees, 39 minutes west longitude from Greenwich. At noon, the crew found themselves at 17 degrees, 17 minutes south and were steering almost due east. By 5:30 p.m., another island of similar type came into view, about 7.4 kilometers, 4 nautical miles away. It was named Doubtful Island.
After weeks of open ocean, the crew of the HMS Resolution caught sight of a low, flat island dotted with towering coconut palms. A welcome vision on the endless blue horizon. Captain Cook named it Resolution Island, and its recorded coordinates place it in the northern Tuamotu Archipelago of what is now French Polynesia. Today the island is almost certainly known as Nukutepipi, first spotted by Bougainville in 1768. Nearby, Cook also noted a second island he called Doubtful Island, which likely corresponds to one of the neighboring atolls, such as Anuanuraro or Anuanurunga. These serene coral islands, rising barely above sea level, offered the sailors a much-needed moment of visual relief and a reminder that land still existed in the vast, uncharted South Pacific.
Since the sun had already set, they kept to the north until they had completely passed the island and could be sure not to strike the coast in the darkness. The next morning, before dawn, they were startled by the sudden sound of waves breaking, barely 900 meters, half a nautical mile ahead. They immediately changed course, and after signaling the Adventure to warn of the danger, they steered starboard along the reef. As daylight broke, they spotted a perfectly circular island at the site of the breakers. In its center was a large basin or lagoon of seawater. The northern side of the coast was lined with palm trees and other vegetation arranged in small, picturesque clusters. The rest of the island consisted of a narrow ring of low rocks, over which the sea crashed with heavy surf. Judging by the water's color, the lagoon was shallow on the side facing them, appearing whitish, but deeper toward the forested northern coast, where it looked blue. Captain Cook named the island Furneaux Island. It lay at 17 degrees 5 minutes south latitude and 143 degrees 16 minutes west longitude. As they passed the southern edge of the reef, they spotted a canoe under sail at the island's northern end. With the help of telescopes, they could see that it carried 6 or 7 people, one of whom stood at the front steering with a paddle. However, it appeared they had not put to sea because of the ships, as they stayed near the wooded coast and did not approach. They continued their course the whole day with favorable winds and fair weather. At sunset, however, they hove to, since the area was scattered with low islands and reefs, which generally remained unseen until dangerously close. Navigation thus became hazardous after dark.
In the 18th century, sailing ships like the HMS Resolution often employed the maneuver called as heaving to, when it became too dangerous to continue sailing, particularly at night in unfamiliar or hazardous waters. To heave to meant to stop the ship's forward motion without lowering anchor, keeping it relatively stationary and stable in the water. It was done by adjusting the sails and rudder in opposition. One of the sails, usually the foresail or foretopsail, would be backed, That means turned so the wind hit it from the front, while the helm was turned in the opposite direction. This created a balance of forces that kept the ship from drifting too far forward while still allowing it to respond to the sea. In this case, Captain Cook and his crew hove to at sunset because they were sailing through a region filled with low-lying islands and coral reefs, dangers that were often invisible until it was too late to react. Without modern navigation tools or sufficient lighting, sailing after dark in such areas was extremely risky. By stopping the ship overnight, they could wait to daylight to safely resume course with full visibility. This maneuver was a critical part of safe navigation during long voyages of exploration.
Early the next morning they set sail again and passed another similar island to starboard, which was named Adventure Island. It lay at 17 degrees 04 minutes south latitude and 144 degrees 30 minutes west longitude. Around the same time they spoke with the Adventure and learned that 30 men were on the sick list, almost all of them suffering from scurvy. On their own ship, however, the crew remained almost entirely free of the disease. Every effort was made to keep them in good health. They regularly ate sauerkraut, their hammocks were aired daily, and the entire ship was frequently fumigated with gunpowder and wine vinegar. In the afternoon they saw an island directly ahead, made up of a chain of low-lying rocks connected by clusters of trees. Judging by its location and appearance, it had to be the same one Captain Cook had named Chain Island on his previous voyage. So that they wouldn't have to heave to again that night and lose time as they had the night before, the captain sent a boat ahead of the ship with a lantern and ordered the crew to signal if they encountered any dangerous spots. This precaution was necessary because of the many low islands found throughout the South Sea between the tropics. These islands are often formed of reefs that rise vertically from the ocean floor like walls and barely break the surface of the water. At their highest points, they rarely reach more than about 1.8 meters, 6 feet, above sea level. Often circular in shape, they contain a saltwater basin in the center, and the sea around their shores is typically unfathomably deep. There is no doubt that vegetation on such islands must be sparse, and among the few plants, the coconut palm is likely the most useful. Despite their meager condition and often small size, many of these islands are inhabited. Yet, how they came to be populated remains just as puzzling as the question of how the larger South Sea islands were originally settled. Commodore, later Admiral Byron, and after him Captain Wallis sent some of their men ashore when they passed these low-lying islands during their voyages around the world. The islanders, however, reacted with both shyness and suspicion. Their caution might stem from their small numbers, making them fear being easily overpowered. Their jealousy likely arose from the struggle to provide for themselves on their tiny rocky domains. Visitors could be seen as a threat to their limited resources. Under such circumstances, nothing could be determined about their origin. Their language and customs remained completely unknown to the Europeans. Yet these were the only clues from which the ancestry of such people, who had neither written records nor documents, might be guessed.
Sunday, August 15th, 1773, Moʻorea, west of Tahiti.
Early on August 15th, they spotted a tall peak with a flat summit. Captain Wallis had been the first to discover it and had named it Osnaburg Island. Bougainville later observed the same feature and referred to it on his chart as Pic de la Boudeuse, or Le Boudoir. The mountain appeared fairly high, with its summit looking as though it had been broken off, perhaps the remains of an extinct volcano. The island itself was nearly circular, and the steep mountain resembled a cone. Along the coast, there was little to no flat land, but wherever a level spot appeared, the soil, like the rest of the mountain, was covered in lush greenery. As the crew admired the sight, one of the officers who had previously been sent by Captain Wallis close to the shore explained that the trees there bore the breadfruit, so famously praised in the voyages of Anson, Byron, Wallis, and Cook. He added that the island was called Matua in the local language, and that its inhabitants were of the same kind as those on the Society Islands or on Tahiti, which was said to lie only half a day's sail away. They could not learn much more about the island, as they stayed at least 4 nautical miles, about 7.4 kilometers, offshore. This distance likely explained why no canoes approached them from the coast. With little wind, a boat was sent to the Adventure to bring Captain Furneaux over for lunch. He reported with satisfaction that the outbreak of dysentery among his crew had subsided, and that none of those suffering from scurvy were in critical condition. Given their proximity to Tahiti, there was now good hope that fresh vegetables would soon eliminate the illness entirely. At sunset, the peaks of the longed-for island rose from the golden clouds above the horizon. Nearly everyone on board, except for 1 or 2 too ill to move, rushed to the forecastle to feast their eyes on the land from which they expected so much. According to every sailor who had been there before, the island not only offered an abundance of fresh provisions, but was also home to people of particularly kind and generous character. In all likelihood, this island was first discovered by a Spaniard, Pedro Fernandez de Quiros. He had set sail from Lima, Peru, on December 21, 1605, and on February 10, 1606, came upon an island he named Sagittaria, which, judging by various details, was likely today's Tahiti. On the southern side of the island, where he made landfall, there was no harbor, so he contented himself with sending a few men ashore by boat, and these were received with kindness and hospitality. After him, Captain Wallis found the island on June 18, 1767, and named it George III's Island. Due to an unfortunate misunderstanding that occurred upon his arrival, he ordered fire upon the islanders, which left 15 people dead and many others wounded. Nevertheless, the kind-hearted locals soon forgave the loss and injuries of their kin, made peace, and generously supplied him with abundant provisions, mainly root vegetables, various excellent fruits, chickens, and pigs. About 10.5 months after Captain Wallis's departure, Bougainville arrived on the eastern coast on April 2, 1768, and discovered the island's true name. He remained there for 10 days, during which he was treated with great respect and friendship by the inhabitants. Courtesies he returned faithfully. In general, he paid tribute to the charming character of the people. Then, in April 1769, Captain Cook reached the island aboard the Endeavour to observe the transit of Venus. He remained there for 3 months, circumnavigated the entire island by boat, and had daily opportunities to verify and confirm the earlier reports and observations made by his predecessors. They steered toward the coast all through the night. In expectation of morning, they entertained themselves with the pleasant descriptions their predecessors had given of this land. They already began to forget the hardships they had endured under the harsh southern skies. The dark sorrow that had clouded their minds faded. The dreadful images of disease and the fear of death withdrew. All their worries fell asleep. It was a morning. A poet had hardly ever described a more beautiful one. They saw the island of Tahiti, about 3.7 kilometers ahead. The east wind that had brought them there had died down. A land breeze carried refreshing and wonderful scents toward them. It ruffled the surface of the sea. Tree-covered mountains rose proudly in majestic shapes. They already glowed in the first rays of sunlight. Below them lay softly sloping hills, also covered in forest. They showed various shades of green and autumn brown. In front stretched the plain, shaded by fruit-bearing breadfruit trees and countless palms. The royal crowns of the palms rose far above all else. Everything still appeared asleep. The morning had just begun, and quiet shadows moved across the landscape. Gradually they could make out many houses and canoes under the trees. The canoes had been pulled onto the sandy shore. About 800 meters from the land ran a row of low reefs parallel to the coast. The sea broke on them in foaming waves. Behind the reefs, the water was calm and promised a safe anchorage. Now the sun began to light up the plain. The islanders awoke. The scene came to life. As soon as the large ships were spotted near the coast, everyone rushed down to the beach, and some pushed canoes into the water to paddle out toward the Resolution. It didn't take long before the canoes had passed through the opening in the reef. One came so close to the Resolution that the crew could hail it. Two nearly naked men sat inside. They wore a kind of turban on their heads and a sash around their waists. Both waved a large green leaf in the air and approached while calling out, "Tayo," again and again, a word Georg and his crewmates easily understood as a friendly greeting. The canoe came right up to the stern of the ship. The sailors immediately lowered down a gift of glass beads, nails, and metals. In return, the islanders handed up a green banana shoot, which for them symbolized peace. They asked for it to be tied somewhere on the ship, where everyone could see it. The crew fastened it to the rigging of the mainmast. Soon after, the two men returned to shore. The coastline quickly filled with curious people staring out at the ship. Others, trusting the new peace, pushed their canoes into the water and loaded them with local goods. In less than an hour, hundreds of such canoes surrounded the Resolution. Each one carried 1, 2, 3, or sometimes 4 men. Their trust went so far that none of them carried weapons. From every direction came the welcoming cry of "Tayo," and the sailors answered back with true and heartfelt joy at this lucky turn of events. The islanders brought coconuts and bananas in abundance, along with breadfruit and other plants, which they eagerly traded for glass beads and small nails. Pieces of cloth, fish hooks, stone axes, and all kinds of tools were also offered and easily exchanged. The crowd of canoes moving between the ship and the shore created a lively scene, a floating market, one might say, upon the sea. Georg began at once to trade for natural specimens through the cabin windows, and within half an hour he had already collected 2 or 3 unknown bird species and a large number of new fish. While alive, the colors of the fish were strikingly beautiful, so that very morning he began to draw them and capture their vivid hues, colors that vanished with life. The people surrounding the crew had gentle features and carried themselves with grace. They were about the same height as the Europeans, with a light mahogany brown skin tone, beautiful black eyes and hair. They wore a piece of cloth of their own making wrapped around their waists, and another piece in various decorative styles as a turban around the head. The women among them were attractive enough to catch the eyes of men who had not seen European women in over a year. Their clothing consisted of a piece of cloth with a hole in the middle to slip over the head, hanging down front and back to the knees. Over this they wore another piece of fabric, as fine as muslin, wrapped just below the chest in a variety of elegant ways like a tunic, with one end often draped gracefully over a shoulder. Though this style of dress was not quite as fine as the drapery admired on Greek statues, it exceeded expectations and appeared far more flattering to the human form than any the crew had yet seen. Both men and women bore the unusual black markings already described by earlier travelers, patterns created by puncturing the skin and rubbing in black dye. Among common people, who mostly went about naked, these tattoos were especially visible around the hips, showing just how differently people think about adornment, and yet how universally humans strive to enhance their appearance. It wasn't long before several of these kind people came aboard. Their remarkably gentle manner, a defining trait of their national character, was immediately evident in their gestures and behavior, offering anyone interested in human nature much to reflect upon. The outward signs by which these islanders tried to show their affection were varied. Some took the sailors' hands, others leaned on their shoulders, and still others embraced them. At the same time, they marveled at the pale color of the visitor's skin, and sometimes pushed their clothes aside at the chest, as if they wanted to be sure that the newcomers were built just like themselves. As the locals noticed that Georg and the others were eager to learn their language, because the visitors asked for the names of common objects or recited them from the dictionaries of earlier voyagers, they put great effort into teaching them and were pleased when the crew managed to pronounce a word correctly. As for Georg, no language had ever seemed easier to him than this one. All harsh and hissing consonants were absent from it, and almost every word ended in a vowel. All that was required was a sharp ear to distinguish the subtle variations of vowels, which naturally had to occur in a language with so few consonants. Once understood properly, it made conversation sound pleasant and melodious. Among the features of the language, The crew immediately noticed that the O and E at the beginning of most nouns and names in Captain Cook's first voyage were merely articles, much like in many Eastern languages. He had already mentioned earlier that Monsieur de Bougainville had the good fortune of discovering the true name of the island without the article, and as far as the constraints of the French language allowed, he expressed it quite accurately in his travel description with the word Tahiti. However, the islanders pronounced it with a soft aspiration, namely, Tahiti. In the reef ahead lay an opening, which was the entrance to the harbor called Wairua, located on the smaller peninsula of Tahiti. They therefore sent out a boat to survey both the passage and the harbor itself. The men found good anchorage, and, after completing this task, went ashore, where a large number of locals immediately gathered around them. The ship lay so close to the coast that the crew could already hear the squealing of piglets, a sound that at that moment seemed more delightful to them than the finest music played by the greatest virtuoso. However, the men were not fortunate enough to purchase any of them. Instead, the locals refused to sell the animals, claiming they all belonged to the Eri, or king. Meanwhile, while things were happening on land, a larger canoe arrived at the ship. A handsome, well-built man sat in it, around 1.8 meters, 6 feet tall, and he had 3 women with him. All of them came aboard, and the man immediately told the officers that his name was Otai. He seemed to be a person of some importance in this part of the island, and probably belonged to the class of vassals or freemen, called manahunas, on Captain Cook's first voyage. He promptly joined the officers gathered on deck, likely because he assumed this group in place suited him best. Otai was noticeably lighter skinned than any of the locals they had seen so far, and in this regard, he resembled West Indian mestizos. He indeed had beautiful and symmetrical features, a high forehead, arched eyebrows, large expressive black eyes, and a well-proportioned nose. His mouth had a particularly pleasant and charming shape. The lips were slightly full, but not unattractively thick or protruding. His beard was black and tightly curled, and his jet-black, naturally curly hair hung around his neck in the local style. When Otai saw that the crew wore their hair tied back at the neck, he immediately imitated the style. He used a black silk neckerchief, which Mr. Clerk had given him. Overall, his body was well-shaped, though slightly overweight, and his feet were proportionally too large. With the help of the crew's dictionaries, they asked him various questions. One of the first was whether Tutaha was still alive. The answer was that he had been killed by the inhabitants of Tearabu, the smaller peninsula, where Ahiatua now ruled as Eri, or king. This news was soon confirmed by the unanimous testimony of his fellow islanders. Of the 3 women Otai had brought with him, one was his wife, and the other 2 were his sisters. The sisters especially enjoyed teaching the crew how to pronounce their names, which sounded pleasant enough. One was named Moʻorea, and the other Marorai. They were even lighter skinned than Otai, but at least 23 to 25 centimeters, 9 to 10 inches, shorter than him.
This concludes part 20 of Georg Forster's journey around the world about the HMS Resolution under the command of James Cook. I have linked a map of the locations of this episode in the show notes. For those who would like to see the locations of the journey around the world on the present day, I recommend my YouTube channel, Voyage to Go. There, I visit the places from Georg Forster's travel narrative and try to uncover traces and connections between today and the past. So that was episode 20 of our journey around the world with Georg Forster, Captain Cook and the HMS Resolution, on which we will continue our travels together in the coming weeks. I hope we can travel a little further together, because life is a journey, being part of it is everything.